I've always kind of come to the table not appreciating this notion of like, here's normal people up at the top of the graph, and here's you, or here's your kid. And your goal, for some reason, is just to push as many skills through as you can and get to that benchmark. And whether it's implied or explicitly stated, like this is what a second grader can do, I think we need to have more discussions about the cost of, comparisons to normal.
This was a thing that the parents had experienced in multiple assessments with their kid already. And the kid is 4 years old, 3 years old. And they're already told that their kid is so low functioning that they don't show up on the assessments that the low functioning experts know how to work with. And that's the narrative that these parents are getting. And so we definitely didn't want that. We wanted that if you got a heartbeat and you interact with the world, we can do something.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Cooperant Learning. I'm the host, Kyle Steary. The host? I'm your host. I don't know. It sounded weird saying the host, Steve. Should I not say it that way?
You could have this one. I'll let you have this one.
Thank you. It's been a minute. One. Yeah, we haven't done a show in I think like a month. It's been a little bit of time. So
what are we paying you for around here?
I know. I'm sorry. That's the voice of Steve. How are you doing? What's your favorite cartoon? I'm tired of asking how you're doing.
I don't know. Rick and Morty, and then all of a sudden one of the creators is a horrible person. You find out, you're like, oh, can I actually like that show anymore? But I like that one just because like the scientific relevance, and they actually did some research and base it on some really hypothetical but possible things. So that's fun.
I think I've seen the beginning of like almost every Rick and Morty episode, but I usually fall asleep. But that's my go. I think
it's because you fall asleep at 9 p.m. if you're still awake.
I fall asleep. Steve and I got to hang out in San Francisco, and he got really accustomed to my nap and sleep schedule really fast. He's like, "Are you taking another nap?" And I'm just like, "Yeah, I can't stay up for longer than a couple hours."
Say ABAI, like, oh, we're gonna have to go get some dinner. Do you need to go get a nap in first or not? Because I'm gonna get hungry here.
Well, I'm glad I know your favorite cartoon, and I'm glad people know my nap schedule. But let's introduce our guests. We got not one but two guests today, because that's how we do things here at Cooperant Industries. We're joined by some folks who have spent a big part of their careers asking some pretty cool questions, important questions about learning, assessment, what it means, what meaningful change should look like, and what it means. Our first guest is an autistic behavior analyst, father, and as he describes himself, general agent of chaos. Over the last 19 years, he's worked with learners across the lifespan from toddlers to individuals in their 90s. He's the co-creator of the genArete learning system, and in his role as director of learning systems, has contributed to the development of curricula focused on career readiness, paraprofessional training, pre-transition employment supports, and innovative low-dose skill acquisition models. Mark Malady, welcome to our show.
Hello. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to chat today.
Perfect. And you're not alone. So joining him, a lifelong student of human learning and behavior whose work explores the intersection of behavior analysis, language, and clinical intervention science. He earned his PhD at the University of Nevada, Reno, where he was the final doctoral student mentored by Stephen Hayes. I want to talk about that for sure. His scholarship focuses on building stronger bridges between mainstream ABA and approaches such as functional analytic psychotherapy, acceptance and commitment therapy and training, and process-based therapy. Stu Law, thank you for joining us.
Howdy.
Hey, what did I miss? Tell us a little bit about yourselves, guys.
I would say, I'm the last student of Dr. Steve Hayes. That's maybe a good place to start. My lab, I jumped labs for a while, and I eventually found that I was really interested in relational frame theory. And so I kind of met and got coffee with Steve and ended up getting, kind of doing a trial run with his lab, which at the time he had moved from clinical psychology back to behavior analysis. So he founded the behavior analysis program at UNR, and then he kind of drifted back into clinical psychology. And then he came back to behavior analysis and that department. And so all of my lab mates were clinical psychologists, which is really cool. So my version of behavior analysis is being surrounded by people who work with veterans, who do functional analytic psychotherapy and different psychotherapies, and like what you might traditionally call clinical psychology. So that's how I finished my training. We were really interested in this idionomic thing that we might get into, we might not. It's a long yarn, but that's what we talked about as a lab for most of the time. But how I got there is working primarily with adults doing ABA. I worked a little bit with kids, did some precision teaching, those kinds of things. And I have my origin story just doing work for credit at a place called Path. And that's the place. I was actually kind of like a neuro-oriented guy. I was really obsessed with the brain and what the brain can do. And I met Mark when we were both in our early 20s. And he kind of like shook that out of me. And then, yeah, from there, we've kind of been on and off different projects together, and we've worked together for a really long time, and kind of have done a lot of different behavior analytic things and worked in the field. So that's kind of my story, I suppose.
That's great. That's great. Mark, where are you in that we crossed over to you there a little bit. Where's your story intersect?
I think when he says I shook it out of him, he means I used to violently yell at him quite often. It took me a long time to soften how I present to other people, and Stu met me in my very, very rowdy days where when people were doing illogical things, I did not know how not to talk about it. I didn't speak about it kindly. I was not known for being kind when I corrected people on that. And Stu was one of the ones who could tolerate it, I guess. Because there were many that did not. But yeah, I accidentally ended up at that for credit work, where you pay. I've heard Dr. Sparks talk about this a couple times on the podcast, but you pay to do the job for, the first 6 months to a year and a half or 2 years, depending on how lucky or unlucky you are. We come from that model. And so I had almost finished. I'm really bad at paperwork, so I didn't actually get an associate's degree, but I almost had an associate's degree from community college in Vegas. And the kid in my stats class that used to maybe cheat off of me, maybe not, it's unclear. He came into my Starbucks and I was working a graveyard shift, and he was like, "What are you doing next?" And I was like, "I have no idea." And he's like, "It's really easy. Just click a button and you can go to UNR." And UNR is like 7 hours in a car away from Vegas, by the way, but it has all the scholarships that I qualified for. He's like, "I have a room. You just pay me $300 a month. You show up and I'll pick you up to move in 2 weeks." And I was like, "All right, deal." So I did that, and I got blackout drunk, and I went home and I filled out my classes, and I accidentally signed up for a work experience class working with the last group of people who were deinstitutionalizing off of the state institution. And so I had no idea what I signed up for. I hated Skinner at the time, by the way, because I had found Walden 2 in a used bookstore, and I read it, and I thought he was a shit ass writer. And so I was like, "This guy's like, yeah, like he doesn't know how to tell an interesting story." Like, what?
It is a terribly written book, in your defense.
Yeah. So that was my view of Skinner. But I got into psychology because I was originally going to study history. I got into psychology because my Psych 101 was an old school BT therapist who had retired. And she actually had us hand mapping out CS, US, CRUR relationships. And so we're mapping out the whole thing on really complicated things, which I didn't learn until my mom sent a box up 4 years ago. And I was going through that and I found that and I was like, "Oh shit, this is why relational frame theory was so easy for me."
Oh, yeah.
Relational networks. And so I was like, man, I had a really interesting run on that one, but I never put it together that she was the reason that I could understand relational frame theory so easily. That was the first class I got a B in since I started getting A's in 4th grade. From 4th grade to that first class, it was the first class I got a B in. So I was like, screw it, I'll switch from a high school history teacher to psychology. So I accidentally signed up for that class. I neglected it for the whole semester because I accidentally also created my work schedule at the Starbucks I transferred for at the same time of the class. So I didn't know how to deal with that. So I just didn't until I sent a drunken email that I was about to lose my scholarship to a grad student at the time. And I said, "Yo, can I make these hours up and can you give me an incomplete so I don't lose my scholarship and have to drop out of college? And he's like, okay, good, because everybody goes home on Christmas break. So come work Christmas break. So I went and I jumped in 30 hours a week. By day 3, I was a supervisor, a floor supervisor, a case manager, and I was writing behavioral programs for the most aggressive client.
Yeah.
Which I apparently made a lot of drama in the whole program, and like several of the professors were pissed that I was writing programs as an undergraduate. And even then, I was like, "What the hell are you doing?" But the graduate student who was in charge of it, he kind of got conned. He like started his own business. He went in with his master's degree. He already had a full ABA practice, and he said like, "The 2 placements I don't want are your 2 applied, because like I already do that. I'm good at that. I want these other placements." And they said, "You know what we're going to do? We're going to put you in front of the applied one because you're the only BCBA here. And we need supervision for the graduate students." So he was just like checked out. And so when I was like, "I'll do it," he kind of jumped on that and let me ride. He like oversaw things. He made sure I didn't do anything too crazy, but
Sure.
yeah. So I've been programming basically since my 3rd shift. And when I met Stu was like, what, 3 months after that. So I was already kind of crazy at that point. I'd never taken a BA class, but when I saw the guy and I started programming, I was like, I have to read everything I can. So I just started reading a lot of books. And because Context Press started at UNR, like a smart business does, they got the university to buy all their books, right? Like a guaranteed book sale for every book they published, the university would buy it. So the library at UNR had all the Context Press books. So I just thought the only thing that existed in behavior analysis was from Context Press, because I just read every single Context Press book. And then a couple other books. Josh gave me a copy of the White Book and a copy of Siapani's Functional Assessment book. Besides that, though, it was all Context Press and Cantor. Those were the 2 books that were like next to each other. And so I just read every single book on the shelf. And I read every thesis and every dissertation that UNR put out between 1996, like when they started doing their first set, to 2007, when that year was. And I read all of that in 3 months. I'm a very fast reader.
Wow.
And so that's why I met Stu. And Stu started talking about how the brain does everything. I was like, fuck you, you don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. I was really compelled by like teleomagnetic stimulation or something like that. I was like kind of a labby in a lab, and I just thought like there's this magnet you can put on the brain and it can make you think and do whatever we want. So how could the brain not be the place where everything is? And yeah, I kind of forgot about that until we talked about that like maybe a couple months ago. I forgot I was that person.
Well, because now Stu's known for yelling at people when they get into the brain shit. So I always have to throw it back into him, like, that was you, buddy.
Yeah, now I'm the person that when somebody says like, well, in my brain, I was thinking, I'm like, ugh, don't do that.
Well, there is, and not to go too deep into that rabbit trail, but that is, I feel like kind of people broach that topic in behavior analytic fields without going full dive into it pretty often. Like Steve, I hear you talk about that too. We could just understand and cross over fields with neuro and behavior analysis. There could be a lot of ground.
I mean,
it's stuff that I don't understand.
The activity is occurring in the brain, but the laws of behavior are effective. I mean, they are laws of science. And so getting the translation between the 2 would give us a full picture, but it's not necessarily necessary for our work.
Yeah, I've used this analogy before that we're like the Department of Transportation, and our job is to design road infrastructure and roundabouts and make sure people don't crash into each other. And they're like mechanics. And so like it's not that mechanics aren't important, but I think people underestimate how much road design is important in keeping people safe on the road, right? Like, yeah, you crash test cars and engines are important, and understanding what's going on under the hood is really important. But I've always thought of my job as like you design the road infrastructure, and I don't necessarily need to know a lot about engines. You need to know a little bit, but not too much.
I like that metaphor. Let's chat about genArete, the origin story here. So you guys both gave us kind of your learning history as it relates to behavior analysis. What events in that history kind of led to this undertaking of developing your own assessment?
So one of the first projects that I worked on when I had just gotten into behavior analysis and started reading crazy like that, was actually Partington was trying to do a study where he sent out the ABLES-R to a bunch of parents of newborns, and he would have them every 3 months score their child. So these are undiagnosed children, they're newborn babies, so they would get 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, 15 months, 18 months, and you would go on for 2 years. The idea being that you could actually start to differentiate in the data what kids are going to get an autism diagnosis or an intellectual or developmental disabilities diagnoses. So I was actually going through and coding videos for that. That was like my first not direct clinical work that I did in ABA. So I kind of got oriented to assessment very early, but remember, I was working with adult learners. So I was like, this is the gold standard of assessment. And then that got me into the VB map. And that was kind of sad to me that all that stuff that I just read sounded like smoke, like all the hope of what we could do and where our actual applied technologies got us to, being able to maybe kind of understand kids up to 5. And so I was a little grumpy about just our general orientation of how we conceptualize human behavior and where our technologies kind of were landing. But then I went and I got a master's degree from Florida Institute of Technology. When I moved back to UNR, or I moved back to Reno, I was going to drop out. I actually became a craps player for, 6 months, where I had this system of I'd go play craps every day and then I'd replenish my money, and I made a killing. It was awesome. But I was burnt out on the autism industry, and I was like, I can't do that anymore. Because I kind of switched over there when I was at FIT. I worked with kids with autism for a bit. And so my other advisor when I was an undergraduate, Melissa Nossick, she called me up and was like, just come hang out. I'm working for this adult service provider. Just come hang out. Like, you don't have to work. I know you're done with it, but just come hang out. Well, she conned me into taking her job over, doing a whole bunch of other crap, and still being here 14 years later. And part of that con was I would go into 24-hour home providers in the area who couldn't afford a behavior analyst, and we would do like contract consultation to kind of see what's going on. And in Nevada, we don't have a good system for when somebody's decel targets escalate to the point where it's really dangerous to self and others. So we have an interstate agreement with Texas, and we send them to Texas to institutions. That's basically what we do. So my first role there was I was the last stop before Texas. None of my learners ever went to Texas. We figured it out for every single one of them. That was like my favorite claim to fame. But in doing
Mark, that's awesome.
Yeah, it was beautiful. I did that until my kid was born. I needed to make more money. So then they conned me into another. So in doing that, though, I worked with a guy who was clearly going through dementia. And he had early onset dementia. But I was trying to get a baseline of like, where was the peak of his skills? And so I met with a couple of dementia researchers who were kind of BA affiliate, who luckily were at UNR and that I knew from my undergraduate. So I went and met with them and was kind of like, where do we start with kind of like working with this issue of, dementia and intellectual disabilities, and where should I begin? And she was like, benchmark the skills, go in one slice back and kind of reestablish fluency at those skills. It's like kind of best practice. So I was like, okay, cool. I want to do that. So I'm like, I'm going to benchmark this guy's skills, and I get his full record. And every 10 years in the state of Nevada, you have to have a full psychological examination if you're institutionalized. So this dude was institutionalized, was deinstitutionalized. And there's 50 years of psychological records, but every single one was a different instrument. None of them provided anything valuable for benchmarking this dude's skills. Not a single one. Like, I could not definitively say what this guy could do and could not do across those documents. And those documents represented not just good service, they represented thousands of tax dollars over years, right?
Yeah.
You're talking just to do that, it was a minimum of 50 grand to make those documents, and I couldn't do shit with them. So I was very frustrated. I was very frustrated about that. And so this idea of we need a way to understand somebody's skills across the lifespan kind of like popped up again. And it kind of became another fact that I was like, we got to do something about this. But Melissa at the same time was overseeing a rehabilitation program. And she was actually overseeing 3 that she combined. So it was 110 people per day that were across all levels of skill sets. And when I went in there, I was like, hey, how do you guys pick goals for them? Like by law on the Medicaid waiver, they have to have habilitation goals to be here. And all I'm seeing is people like sitting around and like not doing much of anything.
Yeah.
And when we looked at their records, everybody had goals that were like 3 to 5 years long. Nobody was mastering anything. Nobody was learning shit. And everybody was clear, like, you don't learn anything here. That's not the goal. The goal is like have fun. But people weren't even having fun. We couldn't even really answer that question. So how do we pick these goals? Well, we all sit around the table. The person will kind of sit there, and then everybody in their life says what they think they should be doing that the person's not doing. And I was like, that's fucking disgusting. Like,
Yeah.
I remember I had flashbacks to my IEP meetings as a kid and like getting heated, mad, and kicked out of rooms because people were talking about me in front of me, and like it was very real, you know. And then when I became part of those meetings and I was forced to do that, it was not a good feeling. Like I didn't like how that felt at all.
Yeah.
So I told Melissa like we needed skill-based assessments. So we looked at all the ones on the market and they were all just okay. Yeah.
And yeah, sorry. Go ahead. I have lots of questions, but keep going. Keep going.
Yeah. So I was still doing that consultation thing, and I created a career readiness program that was a 3-month career readiness program that was experientially based that got people competitive employment in the area. So I was overseeing those 2 things. I was basically, and I actually took over 13 24-hour homes during that time period. So I was actually working 100 to 110 hours per week for $29,000 a year. Do the math on that and see how well I was paid.
For those listening, we got the finger gun on that one. So,
and so I was way too busy to do that. Clearly, and luckily, that's kind of where Stu comes in.
Yeah, take it, Stu.
Jeez, so sudden. Yeah. So Melissa is kind of a joint figure in our life. She was the deputy CEO of the BACB for a hot minute, but she's now like she's like a CEO of a company that credentials credentialing bodies. Is that right, Mark?
That's nurses. No.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, nurses in the operating room. So it's essentially like BACB, but for nurses who want to get specialty credentials for being in an operating room. So it's a credential on top of the nursing requirements.
Gotcha. So she had a really interesting habit of getting into situations that were really difficult. So like difficult cases. She had a contract. The Department of Justice had shut down an institution in Texas, and they were being sued for like basically providing inadequate care. And we were brought in as consultants to help bring them up to code, basically. And so I would come in and we'd fly into Texas for a couple weeks at a time and just run around like crazy people and try to solve as many problems as we could. And then we would fly off and do it again the next month. And after all that, she needed me in this position, basically saw the hole that Mark was identifying. Mark was too busy to handle the day program and the ambitions that she had for it. And so she dragged me into it. She convinced me to take a job running the day habilitation program, being one of the supervisors there. And so it really quickly became the case that I identified a lot of the, we kind of talked about a lot of the problems that Mark brought up. Meetings weren't very satisfactory. We weren't happy with our services. We weren't sure if people were happy. As a matter of fact, we were pretty sure they weren't. And there were lots of just in-house problems that we were trying to solve. And one of the things that we had to solve was, how do we get people the right amount of funding? How do we get more funding and the right amount of funding given people's needs and their level of support that is required? And so how do we get a more accurate read of like advocating to the state why we might in some cases need more support on some cases, so that we can and that put us, in contact with a lot of the things in the skill-based behavior assessment market. But none of it really hit home. And so we started to homebrew one. And kind of one of the, if it just lived in house, that was good enough. But
Mm-hmm.
over the course of about 5 years, it became kind of a black hole for a lot of our resources in the organization. So it became my sole role to develop the assessment and pilot it and run it through the program. And then slowly we brought in more people. We hired somebody. We took some of Mark's time. We started to put him in our budget. And then we started piloting, across the US. And here we are.
Here you are. That story, Mark, that you told of everyone talking for somebody in a room, very familiar with that, being in that position, not as the person being talked for, but sitting in, identifying that, hey, can we ask this person what they want to do? Like, he's sitting right here and hasn't said a word at his whole person-centered planning meeting. And maybe that's a good segue to kind of like the values driven aspect of the genArete assessment. Um, what how do you incorporate this idea of values? What's important to the person receiving services? And I'll kind of blend that with the question about what were there about conventional assessments or assessments that you evaluated and were dissatisfied with that you thought deserved reconsideration or redoing?
One of the things that was in the water in Steve Lab, and I kind of had I think we all had a sense of this before any formal work was done about it, but I think my work in the lab really gave me a lot of language about how I was feeling about those kinds of things. And that relates to this kind of idionomic shtick, right? So idio is like level of the individual, and then nomic is like then rises to the level of general principles. So idionomic is a word that Steve made up. We made up as a lab, I would say. And it means that you always have to start at the level of individual and then derive broad principles. And so one idea that flows from that is clinical psychology often screws that up, right? And this is the behavior analytic bias towards working with individuals is actually, to my mind, really correct. It's the right way to go about psychology in the way that I want to do it. Doing like large end designs on does ACT work better than DBT on depression is a question that is mathematically like not a good way of doing science if you care about individuals. And one of the ideas that flows from that is a distaste for comparisons and the notion of average, normal, and all of those things, because their ideas, you get a real sense. We did a lot of reading and a lot of work on deconstructing, like, where does the notion of normal come from, right? And what does it mean? And what are we doing when we compare people to normal? And things float around the lab like, is every person who is an error term, does that mean they have a diagnosis, right? And so
Sure.
I've always kind of come to the table not appreciating this notion of like, here's normal people up at the top of the graph, and here's you, or here's your kid. And your goal, for some reason, is just to push as many skills through as you can and get to that benchmark. And whether it's implied or explicitly stated, like, this is what a second grader can do. I think we need to have more discussions about the cost of, comparisons to normal. And I don't know about y'all, but when I hear from friends and family about like, hey, we got to call somebody in house and get an idea of what's going on, times that I've heard from friends and family about, I hear you're kind of an expert in this. We're really confused. It's usually because a kid is missing some like benchmark. Like, they were supposed to be talking by now, they were supposed to be crawling by now, and we're kind of concerned and we're not really sure what to do. And so, this notion of like, here's normal and here's you is something that we've always kind of rejected. And also in working with adults, you see really quickly, you're steeped in this notion of like, people have very different objectives for themselves and for the people that are in their support network. And so, some people just want to retire and kick it. And you arrive at the conclusion very quickly that like, we should just leave them alone and stop focusing on skill building. That is not, I know that our inclination is to move towards skill building, but in the traditional sense that we typically apply skill building, let's just knock it off. And so having a really earnest approach to like, what are we doing here? What are we trying to learn? Came really naturally to us. And so we had a lot of, design meetings early, and Mark came up with kind of the idea of like basically like Pokemon and anime, right? Like comparing people to their power levels and like how they sit in relative areas. And so our display, instead of here's normal and here's you, is like, here is the thing that you told us you want, and here is our best approximation of what we think it would take somebody to do that. And then here's how you stack up against that. And that it has been really nice. It has, like there are so many times where asking that question has led us to different places than a typical assessment would. So for example, people who are overskilled. So like you say you want to be at home by yourself without an adult. Here's what we think it would take to do that. And then we see their skills envelop that goal, right? And so really quickly we shift towards, we need to stop thinking about this as a conversation about skill building, and we need to move towards, how do we prepare this team to allow you to do that? How do we safely transition you towards this thing that the team clearly feels is a risk? And so you have a visual display that supports the notion that we're being overprotective. And things like that started to happen a lot in our meetings, and they really empowered us to have difficult conversations with people, and support teams who were used to kind of like falling into a tradition of that person needs to learn things, and our job is to kind of like supervise and have a certain role in that.
Yeah, has that been a tough sell? I'm thinking of having similar conversations with like guardians or support staff or things like that. Is that a tough sell sometimes when people come into those meetings like, this person needs X, Y, and Z, and you as the clinician are like, well, no, they're saying this, and it's in contrast to what they're asking for.
I think we were having a lot of those conversations anyway, and it was nice to have a visual display and something that seemed kind of sciencey to back you up, right? It was nice to have a visual display that agreed with your assessment of what was going on, that could demonstrate to them what you were seeing.
Gotcha.
And so I think that, to that, we were always going to have those conversations, and I'm sure you've had a lot of those conversations. And it's just, I think having support for that kind of conversation is, I think, how I would conceptualize what we.
Yeah.
Have you ever been in one of those meetings and had someone say, like, try to get you to put in the plan that the person, a male in their young 20s, should have a vasectomy because they wouldn't be a good dad? Because that was an interesting one demanded at one of those meetings at one point.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
Actually have.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think to Stu's point, the disconnect between the person and their family, that's a natural part of becoming and transitioning from childhood to adulthood. And when we can couch that disconnect as actually a good thing, and that this is actually a typical part of parenting, and we can show where the overconnect happens between this is their vision for their life and this is your vision, there's almost always a skill deficit overlap. And so we can find an entry point for the next year or however long your plan cycles are. Let's do something that kind of hits on both, right? And so you can actually start to make some action towards what collaboration looks like from the learner and their adult parents, essentially. So I think framing that in that transition has been really helpful with the guardians who see their role as being exactly the same as it was when they were minors. That kind of has happened. There's been some state level changes on our end too that really has helped facilitate that. Like there's now a protected person bill of rights in our state that we can pull people's attention back to and kind of can be used for advocacy for that reason. So that's been really nice. But in general, the other things that I think were really important that we were frustrated with about other assessments on the market was the idea of ceilings, the top end of the assessment being way, way too low. And that kind of shows up of, if you did a skill-based assessment on an adult and there's 9 other adults on their support team sitting around the table, and you just said, how many adults at this table would score 100%? The answer is 8. It's every single person except that person. You have a shit assessment. It's just what it is. Like, if everybody is showing up the same on paper, to say that 8 people sitting around the table look like the same person, we all know that intuitively feels wrong. We know the 4 of us have some shared overlap, but obviously we all love the science of behavior. We probably like some of the same literature and media. We probably listen to some of the same music, but we also know that we have vast differences as people. So if something on paper said that we all were the same person and we took our names off of it and we went like this and we said, okay, whose is whose, and we can't tell the difference, we're using a bad instrument, right? So that idea of we need really high ceilings. Like, if we're saying that adults with disabilities can literally do anything that they have the legal rights to do, then we need instruments that can show us that. And anything that doesn't show us that is faulty from the beginning. So we wanted bigger ceilings. Like, some of the things with the adult instruments that we looked at were like, literally the items were, they can call their staff to ask for permission. That was an item on one of the main assessments that people are still using right now in insurance.
One of the highest
funded,
items,
one of the insurance funded models. That is one of the items that is a top end item on assessment. So, like, Dr. Sparks, can you call your staff and ask for permission before you go to the bar? You know, like, what the fuck? Why are we asking the fucking question?
He does call me and ask for permission sometimes.
Yeah. At least in the state of Michigan, the staff can't stop you from going to the bar unless there's a danger restriction in place. So
absolutely,
why would you have to ask them?
And they won't stop you, but they won't teach you how to ask, and they won't let you know that that's your right. You know, they'll use sly little ways to prevent that from getting inducted into the repertoire of the person. And so that like historical caregiving perspective versus facilitating dignity at risk, like, as we kind of moved the top end and we kind of allowed for differentiation, it let us kind of talk about that in a much more nuanced way. And it gave power to actual strengths. So, like, when people say that something is a strength, that they say, like, that 1 out of 9 people at the table, they say that's a strength of that person, then other people at that table better not fucking be able to do it, right? If everybody at that table can do the same thing that is a strength of that person, it's not a strength. It's a minimum requirement to functioning in that society. That's not a strength.
Yeah.
And so, like,
that's a really cool way of putting that.
Sorry to interrupt, but in that system of, like, here's typical people up here at the top and here's your kid, discussions of strength are really challenging. And what you see happen is you kind of end up pulling stuff out of your ass, or even worse, something I've seen a lot is you come up with, like, sarcastic shit. Like, like the person will be yelling and screaming and raising a ruckus in the classroom, and some asshole in the meeting will say they're really good at self-advocating. And it becomes this opportunity to, like, sneak in a shot on the person. And that's like the level of discourse about strengths that we're used to, because our tools aren't supporting nowhere on this, like, here's the fill up the pyramid. You can only be less than the top of the pyramid. So how do we orient to strengths if they're only always relatively less than? Like, that is the only thing that can exist. And yes, you as the practitioner, you can put in a lot of thought and you can kind of homebrew some ideas to put forth some genuine strengths, but that's you doing stuff on your own, and your tool is not supporting you in that effort. It's actually working against you, because when that parent is staring at a graph, all they see is, here's a bunch of stuff my kid can't do. That's what they're looking at.
I can see how that ties into the idea of normal, though, as well as to everybody else. They are the normal one. And so whatever they can do should be the top of that graph, the top of that pyramid. Like, yeah, I drive 90 miles an hour, but everybody else should too. I'm normal. You're all weird for going the speed limit. You know what I mean? It's what is normal. It's whatever is normal to you. And so if you're the barometer, that your strength doesn't matter because I don't have that strength as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a good segue to talk about this assessment tool. You describe it as a womb to tomb approach, which seems like I've never heard that term before. Maybe that's more of a common term, but when I thought about it, I was like, that
No,
is.
I made that up. I
Yeah,
made that up 100%.
it caught me off guard the first time, but I was like, you know what other phrase best like encompasses like the life cycle of a person is literally it. That's what we all have in common. Um, but the womb to tomb approach and the low dose model. I don't know if you talk about those things together as one response, or if we need to separate those two subjects. But basically, with those two things in mind, how does genArete work as an assessment tool?
Feel that one more.
Yeah. So womb to tomb is the idea of we're going to be able to assess any person who's ever lived at any point in history, at any point in their individual life. That's our commitment to that. And so it doesn't matter at what stage of their life cycle they're at, we should have something valuable to say. And so we purposely made the assessment not for people with disabilities, we made it for all humans. So I call this, I get to poke back at the neurotypical folk, right? It's like, I get to show you that you're also not fucking good at shit. And, you know,
we're due for that.
But the womb to tomb part is really a commitment to. Nobody, if we've made something for living humans, no living human should score 0. Actually, in our learning center model, we got very early on quite a lot of parents of young autistic children who kept saying, you can assess them, but they're not going to show up. And so this was a thing that the parents had experienced in multiple assessments with their kid already. And the kid is 4 years old, 3 years old. And they're already told that their kid is so low functioning that they don't show up on the assessments that the low functioning experts know how to work with. And that's the narrative that these parents are getting. And so we definitely didn't want that. We wanted that if you got a heartbeat and you interact with the world, we can do something. Our first experimental validation of our procedures with a human was somebody who was in a vegetative state. So we don't need a lot to be able to show meaningful orientation, right? Like,
cool.
If you've got a heartbeat, we should be able to say something valuable about what you do. We should be able to capture what you are doing right now. And so that was the womb to tomb commitment. And also on the low end of like, as the human life cycle decelerates, we actually saw a lot of value kind of throw back to that guy that I wasn't able to help with the records review, but I was able to help him eventually. But I wasn't able to benchmark what his historical functioning was. And that there's a lot of value of like, hey, we're spending ridiculous amount of money working with these autistic learners for multiple years. It should be something that could be used across their lifespan that kind of can give us more information as they go on. We know that they're going to most likely have a hard time getting a job. We know they're most likely going to have a hard time transitioning. Even if they had great EIBI services, odds are, just statistically speaking, that with their autism diagnoses, they're set up for some hardship in adulthood. So what if that early learner stuff that they went through actually provided a base to work from when they see those problems later on in life? So we wanted it to span everything. That was the womb to tomb. The low dose learning center model was, I never liked, even I read the Me book in that first 3 months of reading stuff. And I never liked the idea of early intensive behavioral intervention. I didn't like the idea of 30 hours a week from the very beginning. It was baffling to me that you would have a little kid be like in such intensive skill acquisition for 30 hours was crazy. Because I spent enough time with little kids at that point to be like, how are you going to instruct a 3-year-old for 30 hours a week? That's wild. Like, that's a wild vision, especially a 3-year-old that has no tolerance skill sets. So I always was standoffish and I refused to work in that. So our like practicum sites were basically a low-loss replication model. That's what we had at UNR, or our adult services, the program that Stu and I worked at. And there was kind of like dissidence between the undergraduates who worked in both programs, and we'd kind of like get in intellectual debates commonly when we like ran into each other at bars. And so I was always known for tearing apart the EIBI model. Because again, back then I didn't know how to bite my tongue. Now, I think that the IBI model has a place. I'm not saying that there aren't people who need that model. I don't think it's the entry point to service. Like, I think that's the crazy part of this to me. I think that there's a scaling where we should be able to identify the right people for that. And my general orientation tells me it's probably 3 to 6% of autistic learners. That is the right service for them.
Okay.
That's my gut. That's really different than what we're doing right now as a society.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's really different. So I wanted to think about a stepped care model. One of my favorite undergraduate professors, Bill O'Donoghue at UNR, he did a lot on stepped care inside of psychotherapy. And basically, instead of the same logic, instead of like psychotherapy should be your entry point if you're dealing with psychological hardship, that's actually like one of the most intrusive other than institutionalization. So like institutionalization is at the top of the service, psychotherapy is probably here, but then you have like validated self-help workbooks, you have the social communities, you have a bunch of stuff that kind of steps your way up. And so I like that idea a lot of what would step care look like for young autistic learners. And so because I have kids, I know like what my family commits to for my kids' leisure activities. And if you have a kid who needs services, they probably aren't ready to like go play baseball or go to gymnastics class, right? So what if we could create a model that fit in with that same time commitment that the families are already willing to give to children? So we wanted to look at what would it look like to do skill building for like 2 hours per week. And we wanted to create accountability for the clinicians to deliver. So rather than being like an ongoing enroll until you hit some normal idea, it's like you come here, you're going to do 3 months with us, just like a season, right? In sports. So you do 1 season with us, and by the end of that season, we're going to get you 5 skills that get you closer to that milestone.
And you said 2 hours a week.
2 hours per week, yep, for 3 months. So total of 24 hours of service post our assessment.
A lot of private equity guys just unsubscribe to us. Go
ahead. No, you got our work cut out for us on that front.
But the insurance guys should be subscribing.
Sure.
They love it. A ton of money. So honestly, like everyone that we've kind of shared our initial findings with has been like, have you like pitched to insurance providers? Because I think they would go crazy over this. And that's a potential, but I'm not very money motivated, so I don't ever do that kind of stuff. But with our model, what I am motivated by is like watching change with humans in real time. Like that's interesting to me. I love that. And so we commit to those 5 skills, but we say we guarantee 3. We guarantee 3 or you get your money back. But we've only ever had like 5 people private pay anyways. We almost always find grants and scholarships. So not really that important, the money back.
Yeah.
But you get 3 skills. But we pick 5 because again, we don't want it to be like, hey, we only did 3. We want some movement, right? We want to be able to do better than the minimum. 3 is the minimum, 5 is the gold standard. And we're going to pick those 5 things together, and then we're going to do the work and we're going to get through it together. And the accountability is really on you as the clinician. And it's not a multi-tiered model. Right now, I'm the clinician. I work with every kid in our learning center. It used to be me, Stu, and our other partner, Sella. And so it used to be the 3 of us were the clinicians, but I put them on other projects this year. So I'm the only clinician running service. I said the best one has to be the last one to leave. That was the rule. So we go through and we try to get those 3 skills, and then we have accountability to it. We talk about what's next, and we help them come up with a transition plan. Sometimes it is that we recommend go to EIBI services. This kid needs 30 hours. That is a recommendation. I literally made it last week for a kid. It's a rare recommendation for us, but it is a recommendation we make. So it's not like I'm completely opposed to it. It's just I think it needs to be the right learner and the right situation, the right family, and the right provider. Our wait lists in our area are 18 months. So our turnaround time from like calling us to getting into session is 2 weeks on our end. Families, usually that's too fast for them. So they want like 3 weeks to 6 weeks on average. But our actual turnaround time for families, like, could you get me in today, is usually 2 weeks. So we don't have a wait list problem. And I also have capacity to double it because I have Stu and Cell in the backup if I need it. So we design a model that works to filter the wait list. That's kind of part of what we wanted to accomplish is like, hey, if you're just sitting around on EIBI wait list, though, you can come to us and we can help you solve some real problems right now to hopefully kind of start getting some meaningful movement in your family with your kid and get some good connection going on and get some good lived experience going on. So yeah, that's basically our model. We right now work with kids from 3 to about 30. We don't actually have a cutoff. It's just adult services tends to have different funding mechanisms, and we don't really bill through them for this service anymore. We still do for our host home programs, but we don't offer this service through Medicaid waivers yet. It's not that it couldn't be, it could 100% work in that. But right now we're primarily working with people who are in the gap where they don't qualify for the waiver supports, but they also like aren't leaving their parents' house. They're like living in basements. They don't know what's next. They kind of feel stuck. A lot of those kids had EIBI services 15 years ago, and they're just kind of stagnant, and they don't know what's next.
Gotcha. And what, in talking about skill domains and maybe like visualizing what kind of your assessment tool looks like, what skill domains might, children who are closer to the womb side of things, how does that translate, as a, as you like, how would you reference what somebody was doing as a young child, like later in life, they come back to you and we're still using the same assessment. How does that information become valuable? Does that question make sense?
100%. Yeah. So in those domains, those are primarily our pivotal skill domain, which is like foundations of learning, our complex verbal behavior domain, which is basically a relational frame approach to how language and cognition works, and then our movement domain. And what I would say is those 3 domains really are component or tool skills for much of the things that you're going to do later in life. For example, we had one lady who was working in a manufacturing program and she was building things, and she had a reputation by her supervisors for being kind of obstinate and not following basic instructions. Well, it turned out she did not understand metaphors, like could not respond to metaphors. And if you've been in an environment like that, like so much of the like weird crosstalk stuff is metaphors. So they thought that they were providing an explicit instruction. To her, it was just noise that she could not interact with. So she wasn't being obstinate, right? So she was written up. She was like on a performance improvement plan for this, but it was a clear as day skill deficit. That, because she spoke pretty typically presenting, people would never think like, we need to look in and see how she actually utilizes the foundations of language. Like it just wouldn't pop up. So like the narrative of she's sassy really quickly came into she's an obstinate employee, and that narrative was hurting.
Wow. Yeah. Stu, any follow-up on that?
No, not particularly. I think those are, it's maybe important to note, Mark mentioned quickly, we work with learners from 0 to 60, but I think what's kind of wild, it feels odd sometimes, but unless you kind of look at our work history and where we spent time, Mark will have a day where he works with a learner who we conceptualize our job as getting them ready for an EIBI program. So what are the skills we can give a young learner that even if they got a BCBA provider that we're not thrilled with, maybe potentially, they're still going to benefit from that service. So like, tolerance to instruction skills, things like that we know we're pretty good at shaping and teaching. Like, how do we get them ready to where they're kind of, they enter a kindergarten classroom and, you might call it bad teacher proof, bad teacher proofing. So he'll work with a learner who's, maybe acquiring a handful of tax and mans. And then he's got his next session where he's working with a 21-year-old who is enrolled in college courses and who's kind of not as trying to move out of the house and isn't sure what the next transition looks like. And so the difference between, those repertoires seems really vast, and it seems like a space where you'd want to specialize in one thing or another. But the science of human behavior is such. I've spent time around clinical psychologists, the best behavior analysts that I know, outside of Mark, I guess.
Aha! See, I was waiting for it. Hold on now.
We're in my lab, and they work with veterans, and they, they are behavior analyst to the bone. And so it's just kind of this love song that we have to behavior analysis, that we need to be able to, particularly in this era of like assent and all of the issues that are emerging, like accounts of language and cognition and how human complexity works. I don't know that I don't know many behavior analysts I would trust to do like marriage counseling and then, in their next session, work with an AIBI learner.
Sure.
But it's out there, like those tools and abilities, like that kind of thing, we think is not just where we ought to go. I think if we're going to do right by this assent issue, understanding a person's skill set and the levels of complexity that come from things like, can they understand metaphors? Can they arrange things hierarchically? Like arranging things hierarchically is kind of the beginning of understanding values, right? Like if I can't tell you that, a bear is an animal, a bear is a mammal and then is an animal, and I can arrange from specificity, right? In terms of specificity, what are the chances I'm going to tell you that like this thing that I'm doing now, speaking on a podcast, is serving this value that is like, my ability to reach people and have an impact on learners and make the world a better place, right? Like, how can I see that if I can't even engage in basic hierarchical things, like now you start to question, like, how does values look for this person? Now we need to look towards, if they don't have the skill of arranging things hierarchically, when they say things about their values and things that are important to them, you kind of have to think about other sources of control, right? Is their parent telling them something about that? And so it gets complicated really fast, and it's never as easy as like, unfortunately, just listen to them, because you have to understand their skills in a whole world of complexity. And a lot of that complexity is a behavior analysis of language and cognition, inescapably. And so I don't think it's not that it would be nice to get better at working with humans with complex skills. We have to. And now that we're not working with just 5-year-olds and, and the spaces that behavior analysts are finding themselves, we need better training in these areas that I was steeped in. And, I'm part of this ACBS kind of wing of behavior analysis. And so ABAI kinds of things are a little more foreign to me. But the things I'm seeing over in that ACBS world, where mostly clinical psychologists live, there's an imperative, I think, to bring some of those things to the field in an era where we're so concerned, rightly so, with issues like dignity of risk and assent-based treatment, and why are we doing, and questions of why are we here? What's our purpose, and what are we trying to accomplish with this person? So yeah, that was a bit longer of a diatribe than I thought, but.
Can one of you or both of you walk us through maybe like a real life case study or example where genArete identified a priority that maybe would have been missed by a more traditional assessment?
Do you want me to start, Mark?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, there's one that stands out to me. And in thinking about it, it was part of my dissertation. We had a participant who had 30 hours a week of EIBI, and mom and dad just volunteered for my project as, as a research participant. And the person had the student, the participant in the study, the student had a peak assessment and a number of other behavioral assessments, and had self-injury as a decelerative target, and had lived in about the same space of about, like 30 to 40 instances of self-injury per session for like 8 months, the last 8 months. And as you can imagine, their approach was like, pretty standard, like run a DRO. He earns tokens for low rates and stuff like that. They tried like a handful of those kinds of interventions. And one of the, so we ran this kid through our assessment, and we talked to mom about things that were important to her and what she wanted to see. And then the second piece was like, the 3-month rapid skill building enrollment. And one of the things that we targeted was speaking about like temporal relations or deictic frames, right? So the ability to like speak about time and place and perspective. And we worked on a bunch of those skills. I think it was like 2 of 5 of his goals were about perspective taking, because one of the things that we wanted to do was give mom a wish that was she really wanted him to be able to report about his day and report on things that had occurred. And we wanted to start to approximate that, like, because that felt really important and powerful. And if we could just say,
that's
like,
a common one, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's beautiful. Yeah, it's a cool thing for your kid to be able to say what just happened, the experience that you missed out on, at least having some, recollection and acknowledgement and reassurance. I think for a good reason. That's a pretty common one. And so, part of what we were trying to do is establish a deictic repertoire, speaking about events that just happened. And in addition to that, it served as a vehicle for like addressing SIP. So we would set targets, and then we'd have him like check in on how he did compared to his goal, right? So how many did you just get became a really common question. And we were over the course, again, we're talking, and this was, it broke the tradition because I was in a hurry to graduate and whatnot. So like instead of being a 3-month enrollment, we threw 24 hours at this kid over the course of maybe 4 weeks. But at the end of it, we'd reduce self-injury by about it was cut into about 1/8 of what it was.
Oh, wow.
And we were on like a divide, it was just cutting it every week. And had we continued to work with this kid, I'm confident that we would have, gotten it to a level where it was fundamentally different than where it was, and it would have granted him access to different places. And so, it's kind of 2 things. One is, this is that understanding of, this is something that we do often, where we have kind of a history and background of interacting with languaging repertoires, right? And so looking at the language option of like, how can we address this thing in a way that may feel not traditional to other people, but to us makes a lot of sense. But also align it with something that mom wanted. And that was one of the most powerful impacts we had, is he could report things that he did that day and things like that. And that, mom was in tears, and it was just like a little research project. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like, and it's not to say we're powerful, we're strong, but it makes me feel like I have something to say in the behavior analytic soup. You know what I mean? Like, I can coach BCBAs on how to address deictic frames. That it was missed, and that was their approach, is something that has given us kind of the imperative to move into the field and have a voice. It's not something we've done lightly. I would prefer to be in the shadows and just hanging out and doing things like that. I think Mark would too. But it's cases like that where you're like, if you just knew how to interact with relational frames in a way that wasn't just a zop is up and a bop is up bop. And again, this learner had a peak. So presumably the BCPA who was working with him had some kind of training in RFT, but still didn't recognize this as solvable through an intervention targeting deictic frames. And so, that's one that Steve was really happy about. Like, he was really excited when he read that in my document for my dissertation, and it's kind of stuck with me. And it's one of many examples, honestly, that are like that. We often take on cases from people who are receiving behavior analytic services, and we often are able to say something that is not currently being said. And I don't think it's because we're extraordinary. I think it's because there are things that behavior analysts, I think, now that we work with all the populations that we work with, and we're not just working with 5-year-olds with autism, you got to know how to do these things in order to navigate through the waters that are ahead. And so that's what we're trying to do.
Do you think that speaks to the tendency in our field of treating ABA like a treatment approach, as opposed to a philosophy, or as opposed to a living and breathing science? Like, oh, this is what we do when X, Y, and Z happen.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. One of the things that you had said might come up as a question that we were excited to talk about, but it creates a lot of complexity is, like what's the line of research that led us down this path? And both Mark and I, our immediate response was it's much more a philosophical orientation. Like it's much more about like there's not a particular study, right, that launches me into action. And oftentimes when I meet behavior analysts and they're like, where's the study that shows me that? That leads me to be concerned more often than it leads me to be encouraged about our roots with science. But we make the claim that we are a science of human behavior, and that's something that, well, what is science? What is a science of human behavior? And it leads you down much of what has informed what we do and our practice and our favorite articles and things that we assign to students and graduate learners that we're working with and BCBAs that we supervise. Most of it is philosophical in nature. Most of it is things like what is functional contextualism, or what is a science of behavior, or why is ABC fundamentally incorrect? Because behavior is the whole three-term contingency. You can't have behavior so it's like sorting through issues and having an understanding of behavior that is consistent and that is oriented in a certain way to where you can answer questions and oftentimes defend yourself against people who aren't prescribers to a science of behavior. Many people that you're going to sit across from at meetings and tables, they don't agree as to what the solution is. And if you're not clear about your assumptions and what behavior is and how it works and how you can help, you're in trouble. And yeah, the technological approach to behavior analysis does not get you there. It does not. And so, and I would argue in my nod to Steve, the reason that Steve has been as successful as he has been, in my experience in his lab, is that he has been philosophically consistent and focused. You will find his work to be always functional contextual in nature, and he does not deviate from that perspective. And that consistency in his approach is part of why he's also a monster workhorse, like crazy. But more than that, I would argue there are other people who are they find themselves busy, but they're not productive. The reason I think that Steve has been productive in so many areas and that we've been productive in less so, but is he always has an eye on some kind of pragmatic outcome that is aligned with his scientific perspective. And so, our answer to that question was going to be like, there's no line of research per se, but like picking up different wings of the field, like precision teaching and learning kind of the wisdom of those areas has been helpful. But, it's never really about some line of studies. It's about an approach to the science of human behavior and staying consistent inside of it.
Sure.
Yeah, I was in a meeting with one of the heads of one of the local community mental health agencies a week ago, and we have this new program where people come into the houses we're setting up, and then it's basically BCBA led design. The staff are following, everything is designed in a way to help improve the most severe behavior. So then hopefully it's short term, they can move to a less restrictive environment as quickly as possible. And they said, oh, where's the research for that? I'm like, I'll send you a couple thousand articles on the individual things we're doing, or I could give you just, some books on the philosophy in general, but there's no research on this,
Yep.
Yeah.
No, yeah. And, those kinds of things can be thrown in your face too. I mean, precision teachers obviously have a great track record. Morningside Academy is a fantastic place that changes a lot of lives for the better. But if you take that stuff into the school district, you'll get a study in your face that is fluency building creates anxiety, test anxiety. And like there's a study that shows that if you try to fluency build with these kids, you're creating test anxiety, and that makes you a bad person. And so, yeah, that kind of, it leans towards this idionomic rep that would be another 3 hours. So I won't get into it, but it sort of doesn't work like that. But I think a lot of us, when we think about how do we prove we're a science, we want to point to like, well, here's the study that.
Sure.
And I think that comes down to process versus procedure. So like Dr. Sparks, the processes that your whole model is built on is evidence-based. The procedure itself is exploratory in nature, and you're using the data to verify. And it's like that process with procedure orientation is so lost on the world. It's been a huge part of frustration in my career, because it's like I pull even conceptually, like I am inspired by interbehaviorism, radical behaviorism, functional contextualism, and Xing Yao Guo's epigenetic behaviorism. Those are like, that's my core. And how I recombine that is so different than what you're going to get from anyone else who isn't using those. That thinking that there's one perfect system that exists that explains all of science and will never change is so antithetical to science, and it creates science as dogma or religion at that point.
Yeah.
That's not what we're trying to do. You know?
I did want to end on this one, and this is going back to kind of the values-based questions. Clinicians navigating teaching skills to learners out in the field right now. How are they? What would you recommend, or what's your advice to them navigating teaching those socially expected skills versus skills that might be genuinely meaningful for one particular person? Should one take priority over the other? How should they navigate the dichotomy of kind of those two, maybe not opposing values, but two kind of different things?
Yeah, I think it's a complicated question, but I think it starts with a motivational interview process and ensuring that you've kind of tied together the parts of your system so that you're clear on what the values are of the service recipient and their support network. And that you identify need in a hierarchical arrangement of like, what's the pressing concern right now and what's long-term oriented. And then as you go through and you're doing target selection, you're kind of pulling out, this hits right now, this is long-term oriented. I think a lot of times in our history where we got ourselves in trouble was we took the immediate experience of the learner and we said, that doesn't really matter right now because we're doing it in service of this long-term thing. And that, I think, is probably a practical thing that you can start doing in your own practice tomorrow, of just tying out, is this for right now or is this for some hypothetical future that we don't know about?
Awesome. Guys, where can people go to learn more about genArete and learn more about your assessment tool?
So we've got our books, Volume 1 and Volume 2. You can buy them on Amazon. That's a reasonably priced starting point to kind of get familiar with how we look at things, the kinds of skills that we look at, and how we live up to the things that we've been talking about. Probably the best resource right now would be, we have one of those schools with a K, SKOOL. It's kind of our community where we plan on interacting, posting. There's a lot of resources there. So Mark mentioned Xinjiang Guo. There's resources on who that was, what it was, what the biopsychosocial approach to behavior analysis is, and things like that we think are really important and hit those philosophical elements that we inevitably need people to be upright on to use our tool effectively. That's kind of one of the challenges that we face, is in not looking at this as a technology, but an approach and a way of doing things. We need people to know a lot of stuff that I don't think they're going to be typically thinking they need to know, like functional contextualism versus mechanism and organicism and ontology. A lot of things like that you can find just kind of how we orient to the world. And you can interact with us, ask questions. We're eager to connect with people. So, an email is great. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm going to start a blog called Walden Stu here in a little bit. And we'll see how that goes.
And we promise it will be better written than Walden 2. I promise. Not let him get away with that.
That's fantastic. Hey, Mark Malady and Stu Law, two of the authors behind the genArete assessment tool. Check them out at the links they provided. Thank you both for joining us on Cooperant Learning, and have a great evening, great afternoon.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for having us. It was super fun.